Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Arnis Luks here at the Crossroads, and I'd like to welcome my guests from around the world. Welcome David Smith from New South Wales in Australia.
Good morning, all.
No worries, pleased to
Good
have you,
morning,
David. And Robert Klinck from the eastern sides of Canada. Welcome, Robert.
Good to see the group here today. I discovered today that I have a Canada goose nesting in my backyard. So there will be little goslings there before long.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful.
Beautiful
goose.
sight.
Yeah, they're quite a large bird, aren't they? Aren't they, Robert?
Yeah,
Canada goose.
very beautiful, tan-colored, but a black neck, and they're a handsome bird.
Excellent. Well, that's
Quite
good news.
substantial.
It's actually interesting because we've got some fresh chickens at the moment, and they're laying, which is good. And we've also got a swarm of bees in the backyard in a hive, and we haven't had one there for possibly at least 6 months. We normally do have them come through, but it's lovely. It's lovely seeing the natural world, just looking in your own backyard. Welcome, Wallace Klinck from the western ends of Canada.
we have Canada geese out here too, and they are really a noble creation. And I had quite a long discussion with one a while ago. Actually, I met one on the street, and it stopped and looked at me, and I went over to it and spoke to it, and it seemed to be most attentive. And so we had quite a little chat, and eventually it went all about its business. But there was a movie quite a while ago now, called Fly Away Home, I think it was. And a small aircraft accompanied them on their annual trip down to the south in order to winter.
And that to me is
a magnificent bird.
It really is. And this the thing is that with modern, let's be serious about it, with modern technology, the light-winged aircraft that followed the geese or led the geese in their pilgrimage, if you like, or whatever, your migration pilgrimage, you're actually in the middle of it. You're watching it as no one else could actually watch it, as if you were there. And I think that is a particularly beautiful opportunity that we have, experiencing the natural world, with or without. The natural world can be at times quite cruel, and and I guess in that you've got to just take it with a grain of salt, that there's the good and the bad that goes on. But that's the way nature is, to build things up. All right, I'm going to cut across to websites and to see what the most salient points are in today's news round. But before I do that, let's just go across and have a look at, we talked about the Canada goose. Well, this is actually images of it. I thought the least I could do was do the right thing. Bragging rights for, of course, those in North America. Okay. Australian newspapers, main bits are in regard to, I find this one interesting, repatriation flights from India. Now, India is depicted, you'll see that there's this huge media propaganda campaign about people dying in the streets, about mass burning, where they're using historical images of a gas leak where hundreds were killed earlier on. I think it was last year sometime, and they're using the same images to run the propaganda. Very frustrating. Where does the truth actually lie? But it's this article here that I find interesting, the factor in Australia's jobless and in regard to overseas students. Now, Australian universities, they were opened up. They were opened up for further places under a coalition government, under a conservative government, I might add. And what it did was it more or less doubled the immigration rates into Australia. This is absolutely huge effect when you think about it, that you're going to just change the numbers of students, overseas students coming in. But of course, from that, they actually make up most of the immigration into Australia. And then you've got family reunion. And so the numbers just catapult into the 250,000 a year. And that's actually what we're getting. University of Adelaide cut price MBAs. So they're advertising. And I noticed in the early days of COVID that the universities were prepared to pay the extra costs of getting these students back into Australia because it was such a lucrative a lucrative industry. So I think that's really important to lay that down, that the immigration and university enrolments are directly linked. Okay, we look at perhaps some of the issues with finance. I don't know that there was anything really compelling in regard to finance for today, but I'll leave that up to the floor to discuss it further. Justin Trudeau, Canada, aligning with vaccine passports. So he's giving a heads up that he's deliberately going to introduce this, so that, remember the depiction of Hollywood, where the Nazis in every film, of course, always wanted to see people's papers. Show us your papers, show us your papers. Well, here's Justin Trudeau doing exactly the same thing, and of course this is aligned with what they're expanding for all of the free world. Show us your papers. We're going into a Soviet or a Nazi lockdown state. That's what's actually going on. Just one further article, of course, was in regard to the golden egg, the international students, and how much income that brings into Australia for the universities. It's quite significant, as it is with the housing industry. The housing industry wants immigration because, of course, it builds the new homes, or it destroys the old homes and builds high-rise to put people in. These are all the things that you've got to consider, the ramifications of policy. What does it mean? You can't have a home building, massive home building program without having people coming in to take those homes, and so it directly links. So our economy benefits directly from immigration. The question is, what is the correct level of immigration, and is it based on homogeneity, or is it based on just simply economics, finance, making things turn over and earning an income? I'd be interested in your thoughts, David. I hope I haven't cornered you with this. You're welcome to actually open up any other subject that might be of interest to yourself. David Smith.
Hey, you've cornered me for sure, Arnie. I'm not a speaker in any shape or form. But what you say is correct. The flow-on effects of government decisions with relation to the universities. I live nearby to Armidale in New South Wales, where the small town there's 25,000 people. The town relies on student population for housing rental, for every small business. The town relies on students coming in each year. There's a lot of things impacting on that, and remote learning comes into it too. The universities are under pressure everywhere, and consequently, as you say, they're almost paying students to come to fill places. So yes, there's flow on all around, but it's just another example of how our governments are serving an agenda other than service to the people of each country. There was a quote, who was it? Government's only legitimate anyhow in that it's serving the people of that country. That was the gist of it. And governments have ceased to serve the people within there. They're on an agenda which is being imposed, I think is the word, from outside. You watch the TV, the news, you can see them all sprouting the same words. They've got to get in those key words to get their brownie points. And they're just like puppets on a string.
Yeah.
It's a shameful, shocking thing to see people who are supposed to be, in Australia's case, supposed to be a Christian. He appears like a knight in shining armour and a statesman almost, but he's playing a completely different tune to the people of Australia, and it's diabolical what's happening to our government and representative government in Australia and around the world.
No worries. Thank you for that, David. That's certainly a candid opening salvo, and I appreciate your input on that. Robert Klinck, your thoughts, please.
Well, I think this phenomenon of the universities seeking overseas students or students from outside the country is quite universal now, because they represent such a large proportion of the revenue of the universities. But this is just another example of how institutions are stressed financially. And all institutions have been stressed financially in the past. They're all looking for new ways to acquire money, because there is a stringency of money, there's a shortage of money overall in the community. So the universities are just one aspect of this problem, and they seek money where they can obtain it. Now, they've been very profligate, I would say, with their budgets. So in that sense, they're not administering things in an efficient way. They've been virtually drowned in large numbers of administrators. That's another phenomenon of the recent past, that every institution is flooded with this administrative class that is so redundant. It's not necessary, and it's also not professional. It's not derived from the professional people who are involved with the institution. It's a new managerial class. And I think that the professionals often find that it is an annoyance, or if not more than an annoyance, to have people ignorant of the professional goals of institutions making key decisions on what's going to be done in those institutions. Anyway, this is just another aspect of the subversion that David has alluded to. And that subversion is critically of our governments. Everywhere we have seen a uniformity of reaction to this COVID crisis that, if it hasn't opened people's eyes to the fact that something very strange has happened to our societies, people are not conscious anymore. It's just so astonishing that all the politicians, from the national to the provincial or state, down through even the city councils, are virtually to a man defending the rules that have been imposed on society because of this COVID crisis. And these rules are such a terrible attack on all the freedoms and independence that people have assumed they had for so long. So what we have are not representatives. We have just an unlimited supply of actors, because as far as I can see, they're all up saying, I wish we didn't have to do this to you, but unfortunately we do. But you know something, people? It's hurting me more than it's hurting you. In the meantime, the people who are being hurt so dreadfully are earning their incomes. They haven't had any interruption in their incomes. They're munificently rewarded or financed. And these people who are imposing hardship on others can get up and actually claim that they are suffering too. It's such a display of hypocrisy. You can hardly believe it.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Robert. That's an excellent summary from your point of view. I'm just going to touch on the most important salient points that I've taken from it. One is that the revenue for immigration and universities is consistent around the world, and that is that the policy is coming, if you like, from an authority even higher than the universities. It is uniform. The COVID crisis, the treatment, the imposition of masks, the vaccinations, the projection of a vaccine passport, these are all coming down from a higher authority, and again, it's uniform. So this is actually an imposition of, if you like, an authority over and above our national governments, and that the main players are really just actors. They're not actually advocates of the people, they're just actors. And that's at national level, at state level, provincial, and also local government bodies as well. It's as if they're all programmed from the same script book. And that while they're advocating the suffering of others, they are saying that they're in there in the middle of this suffering, but in actual fact they're receiving all of their income. And I found it interesting that he was there's Jim's Mowing. Jim's Mowing is a subcontracting firm in around Australia, and they do lots of things. One is they cut lawns, they install antennas, they do fencing, they do all sorts of things around the home. And Jim's Mowers, those people who are working in gardens and such like to maintain them, during the lockdown, they were denied access to actually do their tasks. They had to stay locked down. They had to stay locked in their homes, whereas the state workers or the council workers who did exactly the same task were given unfettered access to their incomes and to their tasks. Inconsistency, and of course, while the bureaucrats are telling us that they're suffering with us, in actual fact they're not, and their income is protected. And so it really is a separation. It's a clear and distinct separation between those that are self-reliant, self-employed, and those that are under the, if you like, the bureaucracy, the government administration. They're given full and unfettered access. Anyway, Wally Klinck, I'd be very interested on your thoughts on this, please.
Well, I wish I could hear what Bob had to say. I'm at a bit of a disadvantage not being able to hear him. But I think that the essential thing to bear in mind is that the various functions in society are being transferred increasingly to the state, to centralized control, powers, and removed from the individual as such. And we've had experiments in that before, and not long ago in the last century. And it's pretty obvious that when the individual loses control of his initiative, the quality of society actually goes into free fall, because it's simply not a personal thing in which the individual has a personal advantage and investment, and therefore he does not take the close attention and meticulous care as to how he performs his functions in society. So therefore, the more you centralize the control of the functions of society, the more you're going to have a degradation of quality. The quality decisions will be made in a centralized manner, in which the participants simply have no way of judging what the recipients, the consumers, really want. And so they will come up with all sorts of inefficient and often harebrained schemes to control the individual, but which don't really serve the individual. I attended a class once where we had a guest lecturer from Central Europe, and he had been in charge of the mining industry, actually in Czechoslovakia. And he was giving a lecture on central planning. And he explained how they use these crude input-output tables in the initial stage of the planning, but they got so far behind that they couldn't keep up with the plan. The plan kept falling behind. So that didn't work very well. So then they decided they would get very advanced, and they used differential equations. And he had these differential equations from one end of the board to the other. And after several days of this, he suddenly turned to the class and said, "You see, it's impossible." I said to him afterwards, after class, I said, "Professor so-and-so, does it not strike you as a supreme arrogance for a body of so-called experts to sit on top of the mountain and dictate what other people should do, what they should consume, and how they should conduct their lives?" And he said, "Yes, when you think about it, it is." He was a central planner who had lost faith in central planning. And of course, the initiative comes from individuals. Genuine initiative comes from the creativity which resides within the individual human. It doesn't come from some body, a section of government, or it comes from the individual. And we must remember that. That's where creativity originates, and where the best thinking and the best performance, provided it is properly rewarded, comes from. So I don't know exactly what Rob had to say on all of this, but it's a very destructive trend that is taking place. The individual is being overlooked. The individual is actually being denigrated. The individual is being insulted. The individual is being undervalued. And that will lead to the end of the free society, the end of the functional society, and an increasingly centralized control over society, which will end up destroying creative initiative because it won't be allowed to function, as happened in the communist states in the past, and in the fascist state too. So this is the way we're going, and I think, Ronnie, you were speculating about where all of these dictates are coming from. And I think it behoves us, as members of a civilization that once chose freedom as its value, to find out who is imposing all of these arbitrary conditions upon society. Because until we find out where it's originating, we're going to have a difficult time in dealing with it. The people who are being dictated to are falling in line like marionette puppets, because they are held to in fear. Actually, if they speak out, I've had professional people tell me, I know, but if I were to speak out, it would cost me my job." And so a lot of people are actually in professional circles would like to speak out, but they're terrified. They're afraid to speak out because they're afraid it will have very severe and adverse reactions upon their careers and their standards of living and their futures and their families. And this problem of technology bringing about a fall in the need for labor is a marvelous thing, and it could be the opening the doors to a wonderful life for us. But it's posing this alleged problem of a question of incomes. How do you get it? How do you enjoy access to the better life if you don't have financial incomes? Because everything we do today is based on finance. we don't shake hands and simply go through the physical processes of conducting various obligations or contracts. We depend on technology. And if it's going to, and that's why you have this increasing emphasis on the GUI, or the guaranteed income, because it's being put forward as a way of compensating or overcoming this difficulty of the elimination of labor and, unfortunately, the elimination of the incomes which go with labor. So the GUI is being put forward as a possible solution. The GUI is a counterfeit of the social credit dividend. The GUI has been put forward as a measure to be based on taxation. That is completely opposite to the social credit approach, which is to recognize that there is, in fact, a real and genuine lack of income in the modern economy because industry does not distribute sufficient income. And it's a good thing in a way because it actually represents technological efficiency, and it gives you the opportunity of producing without so much labor. But if you're going to insist on labor as the only way of distributing income, you're not solving the problem. And that's what the guaranteed annual income is really based on. It's based on taxation. How do you redistribute the incomes that are existing but diminishing in order to overcome this difficulty of being people displaced from gainful employment? So, because the dividend, the social credit dividend, recognizes that there is, in fact, a real shortage of purchasing power, which is not the fault of the industry. As a matter of fact, it's consequent to industry seeking more intelligent, more constructive, and more efficient ways of doing things, which is by any means the standard of thinking got to be a rational and desirable thing. But if you're operating a financial system that fails to deliver access to these marvels of modern technology because of the very efficiency that it creates, you're working against yourself. You're not approaching the situation from a constructive angle. So here we are, crying the blues because we're losing jobs, when jobs actually hold the loss of jobs and the maintenance and improvement of technology and production by that means is actually what we should logically be seeking. So we're dominated by a false ideology, a false ethic, which seems to demand that people work in order to have anything in this world, because it keeps them moral, keeps them ethical, keeps them disciplined. This is not a Christian approach. It is not a rational approach. It's completely ridiculous. And not only ridiculous, but very evil, because it is frustrating the proper ends of technology and a genuine economy.
Thank you for that, Wally. That's that's beautifully put. And just to touch some salient points that I extracted from what you just said, and that is that the movement towards collectivism, of course, is a denial of the individual, and of course that individual, that opportunity for the individual to find their creative expression in the things that they do. And this, of course, was demonstrated in any, if you like, Iron Curtain country, that the individual initiative is totally suppressed and controlled under central planning. And the proposal, if you like, just a shortcut, what you spoke about, the proposal for the universal basic income The proposal, of course, is conditional. It will have conditions imposed on it, and that those conditions will suppress the initiative from the individual. They will suppress dissenting voices. They will suppress any alternative points of view in any sort of situation. So it really is a destructive circumvention of the, if you like, the abundance that is being created before us. That abundance, of course, is modern technology. With the resources that the world provides, modern technology, of course, has done away with the requirements of labour. So the natural progression of those reduced requirements of labour should be leisure, should be time for contemplation and things like that. But of course, when you've got a if you like, a Puritan perspective on the individuals, a Puritan perspective, and that is that if you shall not work, you shall not eat. And who the dickens are they to say that? Now I'm going to cut across to a website, because I think it's important that we actually place some thoughts on the table, if you like, inordinate influence that certain individuals have over us and our governments. Now, this bloke here is the current Premier of South Australia, and he's proposing that we establish an Indigenous voice. Now, I know that Canada is going through this same type of soul-searching with their constitution. An Indigenous voice, so you have lower house, you have upper house, and you have a third tier to government, and that is that a select race of people in Australia, a select race of people which makes up, by full blood it's probably less than 50,000, but by mixed blood it may be between 200,000 and 300,000 in Australia, of a country of some 20-something millions. And so this select group of people are to have their own unique voice within our South Australian Parliament, with the intention that that will actually continue on through the federal Parliament. And this bloke here, Mr. Mark Liebler, is I think he's a Queen's Counsel, certainly a very high-profile lawyer, advocating this Indigenous voice. Now, Mark Liebler is a Jew, and Mark Liebler, whether he's good or bad, he has a certain view, a certain philosophy on life, and I believe he's actually finding expression in the things that he does, using that philosophy. Now, there's a book about him, and he advocated this book. He actually endorsed it by Michael Gowenda, and I believe Michael is also a Jew. So it's actually a, if you like, it's a declaration amongst Jews of this is the power that they wield over the Australian politic, the Australian body politic, the power broker. I've got the book, I've read it, or at least I've read parts of it, and it's reinforced the inordinate influence that Mark Liebler has had over the Australian government. And this makes no difference whether it's Labor government or Liberal government. They are declaring that they hold inordinate influence over government, and that's what Mark has been written about. He's essentially been eulogised about by Michael Gowenda in his book. Now, my concern is that if you like, you have a system. They're proposing a system of apartheid, of a select group of people having a greater say over the body politic. And I have concerns about that, because when Australia was founded, all Australians were included in that founding. All the Australians, including the very few Indigenous people who lived on the continent, if you like, or on the continent, including Tasmania, who lived in Australia before the white man came and civilised the nation. Now, the Aboriginal people themselves, as I understand it, in Tasmania had lost fire. They had lost the understanding of fire. So if you go back to the mainland, they had fire. You go to Papua New Guinea, which was most of the, I think it was the Fuzzy Wuzzies who were in Tasmania, and they had regressed. They had actually lost their development. Now, I'm suggesting to Australia, to Australian people and Canadian people alike, that we've got to seriously consider, are we going to go backwards to a collective? Are we going to go backwards? Are we going to regress? Or are we actually going to take the challenge by the horns, which is this culture, this civilization? Are we going to take the challenge by the horns and actually move forward? Look at the abundance that we have. Look at the technology that we have. And instead of having a totalitarian government, a centralist government imposing a Puritan ethic over us, rather have a, if you like, representational government that would reflect the will of the people, not of a small minority who happen to have inordinate influence over Australia. Now, I'm not suggesting that that small minority who have inordinate influence over our government and bureaucracy live in Australia. I don't believe they do. I think that the greater influence actually comes from overseas. But they're not Australian, they're not American, they're not Israelis or whatever. They're internationalists. They actually hold no loyalty to any particular nation state. And that to me is the internationalist point of view is something that we've actually got to consider. We've got to consider, is this part of an internationalist plan to denationalise each country, to internationalise and then have an elite ruling over the entire world? That's what's being placed on the table. And the, if you like, the power broker, Mark Liebler, is doing their work. He's doing the work of those who think in this fashion. Is this what we want? Is this really what we want? What Mark Liebler is advocating, where we have a select group of people who have inordinate influence over the body politic in Australia or in any other nation. Your thoughts, please, Robert Klinck.
Well, it is surely ironic that the ultimate sin of our age is to be racist, and yet what you've just described, Arnie, is a purely racist-based policy. They're going to set up a part of the community in privileged or separate, at least, condition on the basis of race. And I quite agree with you that this is a tactic that is being used in every country. They're trying to shatter the cohesion of society. And if you look at the people who are doing this, who seem to be acting in a way that will lead to decentralization, because you have smaller groups with privileges, they're actually globalists, because they use this as a technique to destroy the cohesion of society. And it's being done in every country where there is a minority. And if there's a country where there isn't a minority, then they're doing their darndest to get a minority into it that can be exploited for this purpose. They'll bring them in, and then they will cause them to feel that they've been aggrieved, and they will get them setting up their lobbying and advocacy groups against the government. And oddly enough, you'll find that the government is usually financing the radicalization of these groups. If we look at the Native community in Canada, for example, it's not, generally speaking, a dissatisfied bunch of people. I think they're quite happy to live in Canada, but they have been infiltrated with agitators to stir up resentment and dissatisfaction within the community. And I suspect that this is very much what this Liebler fellow is encouraging in Australia. It's very cynical and subversive activity, and it should not be tolerated. It really shouldn't. It's astonishing that it is not widely denounced and discredited, but the politicians and the media go along with it. You know, in Canada, at virtually every public function now, the people who introduce the activities will say, we recognize that we are living on tribal land, and they will name the specific Indian tribe who's supposed to be the true owners of the land that we're living on. Well, I think this is a concept that has some pretty profound implications. The people who came to the land as immigrants centuries ago now are deemed to be interlopers, and their interests in the land, which they have done so much to develop, are not being recognized and respected. It's an astonishing turn of events, because this didn't exist 30 or 40 years ago. This is just a technique, a revolutionary technique that has been employed in every country where there is a minority, or maybe more than one minority, that can be radicalized and made to resist the policy of the greater society. I mean, there should be accommodation, but what's being proposed is so radical that it's just mischief, and it's going to end up with the bifurcation, or the disintegration of society, because the people who are advocating these privileges that they want. I mean, we have in Canada, for example, native law. Now, if the natives want this, I suppose that there is some justification for it. They've got some traditional ways of dealing with trouble in their communities, and I think in some ways their methods are saner than the ways of the society that's been imported. But some time ago, there was a move afoot to legalize Sharia law in the province of Ontario. Well, this is just a disintegration of the unity of society. If people come to this country has established institutions, and they don't come here to change those. They come here, surely, to enjoy the benefit of them. But there are just these, I would call them troublemakers, who are encouraging these people to become dissatisfied and to just constantly make special pleading for privileged positions. And as I say, the odd thing about it is that the people who are promoting it often aren't even members of those groups. They're outsiders. And if you look at their broader political stance, it's one of internationalism and globalism. So they're not really interested in these the problems of local people. They're interested only in using them as a lever to break up the existing society.
Yeah, that's excellently put, Robert. And I want to go straight across to some websites and give our audience some valid information as what's been correctly recorded. Now, 1981, Jeff MacDonald was a former member of the Australian Communist Party. Jeff MacDonald trained under in the secret communist training camps, I think in New South Wales, Victoria, and he recorded what was the intention behind the Aboriginal land rights and, of course, this separate development. Now we're talking about the Indigenous voice. Now, Jeff MacDonald produced this booklet in the 1980s. The League was behind it in a sense that they helped get it printed. But Jeff MacDonald, this is his work. And you say, oh, baloney. That's just rubbish. And to say what Jeff MacDonald did based on that accusation that it was rubbish was he produced the evidence in regard to the actual documented substantiation of everything that he said, everything that he had in red over black. He produced the evidence as a complimentary booklet. And you'll also find that there's a DVD red over black as well with Jeff MacDonald on it. Another point worth noting is that P.B. English, I think it's Peter English, he wrote the book Storm over Uluru. Uluru is Ayers Rock, and Ayers Rock was handed over to a certain community on the basis that they were the original custodians of Ayers Rock, Uluru. But in actual fact, they were not. The Uluru was handed over to the wrong tribe, who'd had no historical connection whatsoever with there. But this is just the basis of the hocus pocus that actually goes on with all these things. And I think it really, really is important to recognise that this is a deliberate plan to internationalise Australia's political structure. Now, I want to throw a red herring in here, and I want to mention what we've recently had an election just last weekend in Tasmania, and Tasmania uses the Hare-Clark electoral system. Now, I'm not going to go on any more about it other than to say to our audience that they need to look up the Hare-Clark electoral system and look at the methodology behind it. Because while Mark Liebler and the Aboriginal movement have brought up this business of constitutional reform, and we've got, in my view, a very insipid leader in South Australia who is only listening to certain groups of people and no other, and he's not even listening to his colleagues from within the Conservative Party. And this insipid leader, Steve Marshall, is doing nothing constructive but destructive, and that is attempting to turn Australia into an apartheid nation. Now, I'm saying that if you look at something like the Hare-Clark voting system, what you see is that it's not a majority that actually finds representation in the parliament. If you have in the lower house, if you have regions and you have a group of 5 or 7 potential seats for that region, you'll find that you get more than 80, closer to 90, even 95% representation in the parliament using a method like that. Now, Hare-Clark is used in Tasmania and also in Canberra, in our Australian Capital Territory, as a voting method. I think if we're going to look at constitutional reform, then we need to look at something like this, and not these harebrained attitudes of trying to set out a unique voice for Indigenous Australians when we've got such a small number of full-blood Indigenous Australians, but such a small number. I could claim as much in a sense that I'm, 3rd generation Australian, but how many generations English? And then it goes back to European. I mean, the current Aboriginals in Australia came from India, Pakistan, India. That's where they came from, through the archipelago. That 50,000 years. I think we need to actually look again at this and look again at things like DNA analysis and find out just exactly how long they have been here. Because my reading of history is that it's bunkum, that this narrative is bunkum. And we need to actually revisit it because it's a politically driven narrative, to deconstruct Australia and to deconstruct our constitution. And I think we need to challenge people like Mark Liebler back. We need to actually have a look at where his roots are, his philosophical roots. His philosophical roots is one of internationalism, not of nationalism. Does he really love Australia, or does he want to deconstruct Australia? Your thoughts, please, Wally Klinck.
Well, Arnie, there are philosophies and there are policies, and they differ. And it makes a very definite, profound effect on the nature of your society, depending on which type of philosophy and policy you follow. It's not just all one big homogeneous mess. It's specific, and it leads to specific results. There was a well-known Jewish intellectual in the earlier years of the last century, who wrote a book called You Gentiles. Morris Samuels was his name. He was a well-known Jewish intellectual, and shocked a few people, I guess, because his book was highly contemptuous of Gentile society. And he made no bones about it, that they seek, whoever he's speaking for, a society, a world of their own. A world of their own. A world which us Gentiles are not, by our very nature, capable of creating. So I think it bears investigation as to just what's going on with regard to the influences which are at play in the world. It's people like Lieber will no doubt espouse his philosophy and promote policies which are supportive of it. And that is a natural thing to do. But I think that especially in part of the world that purports to be Christian, had best give some serious thought to this matter. Do they want a Christian-based society, or do they want a Jewish one? They use the word Judeo-Christian, but really, if you look at the situation, and this is not what I'm saying, this is what their most notable authorities say, Christianity is naturally, it is a question of a gift society, a generous God who bequeaths generous gifts upon people. Judaism believes in salvation not by faith and grace, but by works, which are specifically prohibited as a means of salvation in the Christian religion from the founder of Christianity himself. And in other words, one of the noted intellectuals said, salvation in the Jewish world of ideas comes from works. It's as if you're climbing laboriously the rungs of a ladder in order to achieve your salvation. This is not Christian. Nothing to do with Christianity. It leads to labor-based ideas like communism, fascism, socialism, and so on, which is they're not Christian manifestations of Christian philosophy. So I think that people who are all tied up in this sort of thing and psychologically captured by it had better start doing some serious thinking, because they may not be getting what they think they're getting. And I just wanted to point out that from a Christian standpoint, salvation is from grace. Salvation is based on love, whereas Judaism is highly legalistic. And there is a difference. I mean, it's just a fact of life. There's a difference. And you'd better know the difference, understand it, and understand the results you're going to get by following one philosophy and policy as compared to, say, the Christian approach. Because it's making a difference. And all of this concentration on minority groups and so on is a revolutionary strategy. They're putting it forward as some kind of a concerned approach to the affairs and the plight of alleged exploited peoples. The fact of the matter is it's being used to create dissension, to create revolutionary strife, and it is being done in order to promote the centralization of power. And you had better take into consideration where that power is intended to go and where it is going and it will inevitably be going if it is based on ideas of salvation through works.
Yeah, thank you for that, Wally. That's beautifully put, and it's so very, very important for us to consider philosophy when we talk about these things. Where does your philosophy actually place you? Now, the You Gentiles is there. It's available in PDF by Morris Samuel. There's no trouble at all downloading it, and I think that it's important that you make yourself familiar with what's written. I think that's. I think you can't get past these sorts of things. That you've actually got to do your homework. Now, in our social credit library, here you'll be able to find an inordinate amount of writing in regard to why philosophy is so important, and especially this bloke here, Eric Butler. He wrote the Social Dynamics And the first lecture in that social dynamics is exactly that. It's about philosophy, about what you ultimately believe and why it is so important for you to actually place your thoughts on the table and analyze them. Because what you ultimately believe is how you actually pursue the things. You actually outwork it in your life. You accept what is and what isn't, and what is acceptable behaviour based on that philosophy. Very, very important. And I put it to you that Mark Liebler is consistent with his philosophy. Whatever his philosophy is, he's outworking that. He's demonstrating that. He's putting these things, he's incarnating these things into the world around us. And it is, in my understanding of what he's doing, it's international by nature. It is centralist, and ultimately it's about world government and complete control. And that control includes the deconstruction of our constitution, the deconstruction of our Christian heritage. And be very clear about it. There is such a gap. You can't bridge the gap between these two philosophies. One is that power and authority comes from within. The kingdom of God is within. The other is that power and authority is without. That the authority comes from some external source, some other person, some other individual, if you like, some other authority. And that's the cleavage. You can't resolve that. It's one or the other. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing the outworking of this philosophy of power outside of you, or the philosophy of power within you. Government is there to serve the individual. Every institution is there to benefit. Every sporting institution, a church, a university, a government, everything is there to benefit the individual, to develop, to actually cause them to flower. That is the Christian philosophy, and that is a marked difference between internationalism, if you like, in the sense of, if you like, world tyranny, world communism. Your thoughts and closing comments, please, Robert Klinck.
The emphasis on philosophy is certainly justified, and the whole point of Christianity is that the individual is in control of his moral development and of his life. Now, as social creditors, we would say that his material development should be assisted to the extent that the productive capacity of the economy makes possible. But the decisions about what a person is going to do ethically and morally in his life reside with him. And this is why we have a very dangerous situation in the world now, because we have a tremendous movement of people who believe that the individual should be subject to constraints and controls. Well, there might be a necessity for some of them, but you should be trying to minimize them as much as you can. Christ said to the young man, be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect. Well, I think Christians would say that's a tall order, and probably none of us can actually fulfill it. But still, the choice was left with the individual. There's no point in imposing development on people. It's meaningless in the Christian concept, because the only thing that matters is the development of the individual by his free choice. Jesus said, why don't you do what I tell you? You know, he was not saying, I'm going to set up a council and I'm going to judge you and I'm going to impose my will upon you. He was always throwing back the decision making to the individual. And it's quite extraordinary. And I would say that it is culturally unique in the world. But right now we have a monumental conflict of philosophies developing, and the collectivists, the Marxist subverters, I guess. You know, Marx said it was old mole. It's the constant activity to subvert society that he was involved in. And hasn't ended since Marx died. Anyway, the conflict is there, and it is, as you say, irresolvable. Now, the one side of it, I think, is not particularly disturbed that the other side exists, as long as the other side isn't trying to impose its will on those who believe in personal freedom. But for those who do not believe in personal freedom, we are a constant irritant, and we have no place in the society they envision establishing. So we are in a position where we really have to defend ourselves, because if this collectivism is allowed free rein, it is going to end in our elimination from society. There's no other way for it, because you have two philosophies, two perspectives on life that are totally incompatible and cannot coexist. So that's a kind of a frightening prospect that we're dealing with now. I wish that people would get a clear perception of it, because they don't realize how fundamental is the division and how critically important it is to the welfare of them and their descendants. If this is not clearly understood, then the people who are interested in infiltrating and subverting will eventually win, because the rest of the population is blind to what's going on. But once you recognize that these collectivists are working constantly, diligently to achieve their ends, and they will never let up, and they will keep coming at you, even if you think you've won a little victory, they will be coming back at you. You may count on it. So it's a war. It's not a war that the defenders of personal freedom want to see end in the suppression of anybody in society or the crushing of anybody in society. We would be very happy to see all these advocates of collectivism living their individual lives too, and finding their own, following their own evolution in terms of personality and growth of understanding of life. But good heavens, we have to recognize the situation we're in, and it's becoming blindingly evident, I would say, that every society, every Western society at least, is under this pressure. And all, there are hundreds, thousands of years of evolution of institutions that existed to give strength to the individual, to protect the individual's rights, are being undermined and subverted. If we allow this to go to the ends that the collectivists would have it go to, then it won't be coming back for a long time, especially with the surveillance and other techniques of modern technology. It's really a dire situation we're in, and we have to recognize it and alert our fellow citizens to it, and make sure that it is stopped.
No worries. Thank you for that candid report, Robert, of just the dire situation that we do find ourselves in between these two irreconcilable philosophies. One of absolute power exercised from something external to the individual, and one of the individual having the power and authority in themselves to manage their own life as they see fit. Your thoughts and closing comments, please, Wallace Klinck.
Yes, Arnie, and that deals or pertains to the nature of this failure, increasing failure because of technology, of the ability of the economy to deliver the final product to consumers. It's very much related to this, because we have to consider the source of this wealth. The guaranteed annual income or guaranteed income is actually not the same as the social credit dividend at all. They're worlds apart. The social credit dividend is an inheritance. It comes from actually a profit that occurs spontaneously and naturally from human association within the context of natural law. But the guaranteed income will be a political thing. It'll be something granted by government. It'll be something that's subject to eternal debate and controversy, and which will do nothing but serve the purposes of centralized power, as an attempt is made through that process to resolve these so-called promises. The dividend goes to every citizen without question, without favor. It is an inheritance. It is inalienable. It is not subject to debate. Everyone is entitled to that surplus, a share in that surplus that occurs because of the factors which are not labor factors, but the increasing factors of technology which bring about the increased production and the refinement of production, and has nothing to do with labor. It is something brought from the past as an inheritance. It's not due to labor currently at all. So we have to understand that the whole nature and philosophy and policy of distributing this enormous surplus, this abundance in nature or from God or however you want to look at it, is not something for governments to debate and grant as privileges, because a government can take back any privileges that it extends. The dividend is non-revocable. It is simply inherent in the nature of things, and it is not something that the government has any right or power to effect. All it does is gives the government the ability to statistically determine what the non-labor component of production is and make an equal distribution of that without favor to all citizens, never debating whether or not certain citizens or certain minority groups are more entitled than others, going back to the past and trying to justify things on the basis of some kind of legalistic determinism, and all which involves government, bureaucracy, and law, which all attack freedom. And so there is a very, very great difference here. There's a difference in kind, a fundamental difference. And you have to recognize that, because the social credit dividend is under no circumstances to be confused with any kind of government system or government conceived system to be administered by government to distribute the product of industry. It is something where the people who engage decreasingly in production earn a decreasing amount of their income. The rest is inheritance, and it is inheritance without question. And we must get that, and that is salvation through grace, not through works. Because if it's through works, you'll have a whole bunch of bureaucrats determining who should get this and who shouldn't get that. And it'll just be a basis of argumentation and division. It falls into the category of most other policies as a revolutionary policy to create dissension, and which in the end ends up enhancing the power of the state and trying to, or alleging that it is trying to solve society's problems.
Yeah, excellently put, Wally. That the universal basic income as an issue from the state always has conditions on it. And of course, the state will become more and more involved in making the decisions, your everyday decisions that you should be making yourself. Now, Justin Trudeau wants to impose a vaccination passport. Show us your papers, show us your papers. Goose step, like every other dictatorship. Show us your papers, and you won't be able to travel, you won't be able to go to the post office, to go and buy your food, whatever. Be employed unless you've got a stamped vaccination passport. And of course, this is the measure of control that they're attempting to impose, this totalitarian state over us. So don't get confused about it. This has got nothing to do with COVID. This has got everything to do with power. And of course, on top of all these things that we've discussed is the supposed threat of climate change, and of course the justification to deindustrialise the world, really to deindustrialise the world and place all of that manufacturing capacity into third world nations, whereas the West will be on its knees. And our politicians, what are they doing about it? Well, we saw what Steve Marshall is doing about it as the Premier of South Australia. He's going to do whatever his political masters ask him to do, and he's going to pursue if you like, a revolutionary change in the relationship between the individuals in Australia as being one people under one constitution under God. And here it is that no, it's not one people, it's two people now, and there's an elite group who are going to advise government, and so it's a deconstruction. He's a revolutionary. Don't think he's not. Don't think he's not. And he's in a wolf in sheep's clothing. We get warned so often. Now I know we've run.
Arnie, we have a premier in Alberta now, Jason Kenney, and he is standing as a conservative.
Mm-hmm.
But he just recently gave a talk which was made public. You may be aware that he has renewed the lockdown conditions. Not reduced them, but renewed them, intensified them.
Mm-hmm.
No restaurant in Alberta through the summer months, apparently, I'm not sure the exact period, is able to serve within their premises. They can serve outside, but not inside. Mm. Now, Jason Kenney said this, he makes his usual apologies for offending the average citizen or disadvantaging a citizen. But he said, we have to do these things. Why do we have to do these things? I thought we had freedom of conscience, freedom of action, thought. Why do we have to do these things? Who is guiding him, advising him, dictating to him? What's going on here?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the very thing, Wally. What is going on where our political representatives are doing nothing of the sort, where they're actually like, what do you call it, trained puppets, just masquerading, putting a facade across of some sort of representation. I get so frustrated with the, if you like, the conservative liberals within Australia, the Nationals. They espouse all these things, but their policies are communistic. Every single turn, their policies are communistic, and it hasn't changed. And even to the point where you think that they're actually going to take their foot off the throttle on some minor gesture, a gesture of no consequence, when in actual fact that no, they never ever let go. All they're doing is just drawing you into a false sense of security, if you like, for the sake of an election, and then it comes straight back down again. This is what's going on, and we've got to recognise it. We've got to recognise that these things that are going on are revolutionary. We are going through a coup. The government that we think runs the country does not. It does the bidding of others outside this country, outside, if you like, loyal Australian patriots, away from
And we've had people from Central Europe who've gone through the fire. They know what it's like.
Yeah.
They have responsibly become involved in Canadian politics, and almost inevitably they are purged by even conservative leaders.
Yeah, that's right. Anyone who has a dissenting voice who may actually be saying something and in dire warnings, who have experienced it by coming from Eastern Europe and things like that. That's exactly right. I know you're having trouble hearing some of the audio, Robert. Is there any closing comments?
Well, I didn't say anything about the UBI. That was supposed to be the topic for this evening. I guess Wally has been addressing that.
Yes, he has.
I would just say that the UBI is a policy designed to drive people down to the lowest common denominator. It is utterly static. It doesn't take into consideration the dynamics of the economy, which normally are leading toward a condition of abundance. And it's very odd to me that it's being promoted as a means of establishing equality by billionaires. Doesn't it strike everyone that it's a real anomaly to see billionaires so concerned about everybody's equality? These people just want to run the world. That's all there is to it. And the UBI is a tool that they'll use in order to drive people down to a subsistence existence. And I mean, it's so ridiculous. As Douglas said, we're scrapping over a situation where we might as well be trying to find a glass of water in the middle of Lake Superior.
Yeah.
You know, we are living in such abundance, and they want us not to have access to it, not to touch it. And they do this because they deny any concept that the generation living today has an inheritance entitlement to the achievements of previous generations. We have to get that idea over, and then the whole rotten edifice will collapse.
Yeah.
Because when people realize what they've been deprived of and victimized, it'll surely, if they can manage this. We've had such a demonstration of the mass hypnosis with this COVID thing that you wonder if common sense can be elicited from the population anymore.
Yeah.
But I'm sure the argument is so strong. I've got a quote here from Churchill from the 1930s. Maybe I should just read it. Everybody should think about that. It won't take long. In his Romanes lecture in Oxford University in 1930, just after the crash leading to the Great Depression, Winston Churchill said, "The classic doctrines of economics clearly do not correspond to what is going on now. The root problem of modern world economics is the strange discordance between the consuming and producing powers. Who would have thought that it would be easier to produce by toil and skill all the most necessary or desirable commodities than it is to find consumers for them? Who would have thought that cheap and abundant supplies of all the basic commodities should find the science and civilization of the world unable to utilize them? Have all our triumphs of research and organization bequeathed us only a new punishment, the curse of plenty?
Yeah.
Are we really to believe that no better adjustment can be made between supply and demand? Yet the fact remains that every attempt has so far failed." Well, he made that statement. He certainly didn't do anything about the problem that he described. And in fact, he was the author of the austerity and rationing after the Second World War that was so hard on the people of the British Isles. So he recognized the anomaly that we've got practically unlimited productive capacity, and somehow we cannot make use of it at the consumer level.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's obvious. You have to be half blind or brainless in order not to perceive that.
Yeah.
But because of the media and the ability they have to obscure the facts and to throw dust in people's eyes and to distract them with nonsense, people just don't become aware of this situation. but it's just staring us in the face.
It certainly is, and thank you for that, Robert. I'm going to go to one booklet that one book that I'm in the process of reading in particular. I think it's relevant for today, and that is by C.H. Douglas, middle column in our social credit library, Warning Democracy. There it is there. Now I've got a printed version of this book, and I've only read the first 3 chapters of it, but I can tell you that Douglas deals with these very issues that we've been talking about today. He deals with them, and he deals with them very well, very clearly, very lucidly, so they make rational sense to you as you actually read it. Why are these things going on? They're going on because they're rooted in a philosophy that is alien to the Christian philosophy, and that's the very point. The issue is one of Christianity, yes or no. It's that simple. And if we pursue the no, then it's collectivism, it's internationalism, it's a world communist slave state. And that's what it is, and that's the option before us. Are we going to walk into a time of abundance, a time of plenty, a time when scarcity is unheard of? Are we going to walk into that? Are we going to be brave enough to do it? Seek ye first, and all these things shall be added unto you. It's not as if we weren't told. We were told. We were told aplenty. Thank you so much, Robert and Wallace Klinck. We only had David for a short time. He had to go, but everyone's contribution is always so very, very welcome. And I appreciate both of you blokes every week. Thank you.
It's a great privilege,
Thanks, Arnie.
Arnie. Thank you.